Let's go live to the opposition leader, Peter Dutton.
The government's had 3 budgets now where they've had an opportunity to make decisions that would bring downward pressure on inflation. We know that in Canada, in New Zealand and in the United Kingdom, interest rates have already come down there, and interest rates should have already come down in Australia. But as we know from the Reserve Bank Governor, the federal and state Labor governments keep pumping more money into the economy, which is what's keeping inflation higher. And so people are paying more for their mortgages. There have been 13 increases, 12 under this government, and Australian families are really struggling. So it's good to be back here in South Australia to talk about issues which are important locally. We'll continue to work very hard to make sure that every day until the election counts, because I think there is a much better way for our country. The Liberal Party will always manage the economy more effectively than Labor can, and we can do that because we're not going to have a renewables-only policy which is driving up the cost of electricity and gas. We're going to have a good balance of energy mix, including nuclear, and that way we can provide long-term relief to people in their power prices, and we'll have more to say about short-term support as well, because families have had a tough 2 years under this government, and it's obvious to every Australian that people just can't afford 3 more years of Labor. I'm happy to take some questions. No. The process was very simple there. There was a discussion with New South Wales. New South Wales put forward Mr Stokes and I'm just explaining to you that New South Wales put forward Mr Stokes' name. He wasn't available, as it turns out, and that's fine. It's no, New South Wales nominated Mr Stokes. That was their nomination, and they'd had the conversation, as I understand it, with Mr Stokes. So next question. Yeah.
Saying that he wasn't aware that you were going to appoint Mr Stokes to the committee. Did you jump the gun?
No. Mr Stokes was put forward by the New South Wales division.
Yeah. Was it necessary?
Well, look, in Victoria, the federal Labor Party's taken over the state division there, and now for 5 years. I mean, these questions are reasonably asked of Mr Albanese. My task is to make sure that we can listen to the needs of the people of South Australia here today, but in the case of New South Wales, listen to millions of people in New South Wales who want a change of federal government. Our party needs to be functional, and the way that it was operating was completely unacceptable to me, and we took a decision at the federal executive to put in place a council of wise elders who will get the New South Wales division of the Liberal Party back on track, because we can win the next federal election. We can only do that if we win Boothby. We want to win Macon in South Australia and other seats across the country, including in New South Wales. And we've worked collaboratively with New South Wales division. There was full disclosure about the steps forward, and we'll continue to make sure that we can listen to the people of New South Wales, because they do want a better future for their state and for their country, and a coalition government replacing a bad Albanese government will be one of the best ways to do that. I don't have any further comment to make on internal matters. We'll make that announcement in due course.
There's also been 2 Victorians elected to the community. Why are we taking Victorians to the New South Wales committee?
As I say, I've made some comments in relation to the internal matters. That's all I'd say.
GDP figures today who show migrations help the economy in dire times. You acknowledge your migration plans may be harmful.
Well, look, I just think a couple of points. The government can't be blaming the Reserve Bank Governor. You can't be at war with the Reserve Bank Governor, because the Reserve Bank Governor can only respond to decisions of the government of the day. The Reserve Bank Governor is independent, and she deserves to be respected, and the abuse that she's received from Jim Chalmers just shows what a shambles this government is. The Cabinet is leaking against the Prime Minister. People now in senior positions, Tony Burke, Tanya Plibersek, Bill Shorten, Jim Chalmers, are pitching themselves against the Prime Minister. So the dysfunction that we saw in the Rudd-Gillard-Rudd years is now being evidenced within the Albanese government. So it is clear the wheels are falling off the Albanese government. When you get these sort of cabinet leaks, when you get the dysfunction that we've seen, the abuse of the Reserve Bank Governor, the Prime Minister trying to blame ASIO for the missteps of Minister Giles at the time and now Minister Burke. It's a debacle. But the Australian public just want to know that there's something out there for them and that there's some hope on the horizon. And economic figures that we're seeing out of this government at the moment, that makes people feel, quite anxious about the future. And I get that. I understand, because we move around the country every day, listening to families and small businesses, people are doing it tough. And the Australian Labor Party, Mr Albanese, has made all sorts of decisions in the last 3 years which have forced up inflation, and that's why interest rates are higher, and that's why families continue to suffer under a really bad government. Well, I think economists have pointed this out. Without some of the migration growth, you'd be in recession now. But without migration growth, we'd have more Australians in homes now. The fact is that the Prime Minister brought in 1 million people in a 2-year period and only built 265,000 homes. And so we see families living in the backs of cars, we see families living in tents, we see the homeless numbers going up, we see it almost impossible now for young people to buy a home unless they've got the assistance of mum or dad. That's not what our country's about. Our country is about providing support to those who are in need. And it's about making sure that young Australians, young South Australians, can achieve the dream of home ownership. But under this government, they just make it harder and harder for Australians every day.
John Sink has been...
Well, look, I really worry because there's a human face to all of these figures. When somebody loses a small business, generally they lose their house because the house is security with the bank for the business. People lose their jobs. In some cases, people can lose their super, and it's a tragedy. It really is. But that's the human cost of bad decisions of a government. When you have a coalition government in power, we know how to manage the economy. We're not going to put in place inflationary measures like the renewables-only policy. The economy can't function on intermittent power. We need 24/7 power or our hospitals don't work. There's been a 3-fold increase in manufacturing business closures in this country over the last 2 years. Why has that happened on the Prime Minister's watch? Because he doesn't have a clue what he's doing economically. And when the Reserve Bank Governor gives some advice as to how we could get inflation down, she gets abused by Treasurer Jim Chalmers. And that's why families are really hurting at the moment. Well, Jim Chalmers is the Treasurer, unless he's noticed. He's delivered 3 budgets. And he had the opportunity to make decisions that would bring downward pressure on inflation. Australians have to ask themselves, why have interest rates gone down in the UK, Canada and in New Zealand, but not in Australia? They should have come down by now. They would have come down under a coalition government, and interest rates will always be cheaper under a coalition government. We know that, including back to the 90s. I lived through that period of the 90s. People lost their homes. At the moment, we've got demand for houses, and people have got, in many cases, a big capital growth in their houses over the last 10 years. But people are selling their homes at the moment. People are selling rental properties. People are really struggling, and I just don't think that Jim Chalmers gets it. No. The first point is that I think the Prime Minister owes an apology to Mike Burgess. I really do. I think Mike Burgess and ASIO have been used here by the Prime Minister when he misled Parliament. The Prime Minister said that when 1,300 people came in from Gaza, which is a territory occupied by and controlled by a listed terrorist organisation, Hamas, that those people had been checked by ASIO. The fact is that they hadn't been checked by ASIO, and the Prime Minister tried to hide behind Mike Burgess, and he's been found out. I appointed Mike Burgess when I was Home Affairs Minister to run ASIO because he's a first-class patriot who I think has done an exceptional job in running ASIO. But we can't have a situation where people are brought here on tourism visas without checks being done. When we brought people in from Syria, we brought 12,000 people in, but we staged them in Jordan and northern Iraq, in third countries, before they got to Australia, because as we know, of the 1,300 people from Gaza here now, about 750 or more have already claimed protection. And generally speaking, that will mean that they will go on to permanent residency and onto citizenship without us having a proper understanding of the backgrounds and where they've come from. Now, maybe every one of the 1,300 is a fantastic human being. I hope that's the case. But the problem is the government doesn't know. And you can't bring people in without face-to-face checks. You can't bring them in with a 24-hour turnaround without any checks being done on people coming out of this sort of climate. And I think that's... No, 24-hour... there's none. No, everybody who comes in on a tourist visa is checked against the Mal list. But that's standard for somebody coming from London or from Auckland. That you could bring people in from Hamas-controlled territory after the atrocities that we saw on October 7 is a complete abrogation of the Prime Minister's first responsibility. His first responsibility is to keep Australians safe, and he has failed Australians in this step.
John
Prime Minister